Hey everybody, welcome back to the Summer Special Ed Q&A Instagram Live series where I interview educators and parents for you. Today is day 3 and it's with Destiny, and she will tell you more about herself when she hops on. Like I said before, that I will be asking her some questions, and I hope that these questions encourage you and inform you on your child's IEP and beyond. So I would love for you to click the paper airplane in the bottom corner that will share this live with your followers. And also, if you have questions, you can click the question mark inside of the bubble that is at the bottom of this live as well. I am Monique. I am a special education teacher and a special education parent teacher. And I have been in special education since 2015. And I love to educate parents on being the equal at the IEP table that they should have already been, rather than the guest at the IEP table. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to invite Destiny. This is going to be so exciting. Hello. Hi.
Trying.
Hi.
It's on a weird angle. I feel like I need to turn my phone upside down for it to be at the right angle. Let's see. Yeah, I can't see me at all. I'm sorry, I've only done like 2 lives my whole time. So
Oh, no problem. No problem.
there we go. Okay, am I supposed to see you? I don't see you.
Um, you don't have to, but I do see you. I don't know if it will be better for you. I'm actually not sure how is there like a video icon on your side? Maybe if you click that.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
only showing half of the screen. It's very odd.
Wow.
And
Okay.
now it's cutting off part of my screen. Let me come out and come back in.
Okay. 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 So Destiny's gonna come right back in. This is what happens with Instagram lives, is you never know what's going to happen. On my day 2, the connection was slow, so I had to go back out, go back in, all that jazz. So it happens, definitely happens. But for those who joined, like I said earlier, if you would click that paper airplane in the bottom corner to share that with your followers, to share this Instagram with your followers, this live, excuse me, and or you can click the question mark that is in the bubble to ask questions. Okay, awesome.
Okay.
Is that better?
I still don't see you, but it's fine.
Okay.
As long as you can see me, because I don't really know. I don't know what's happening.
Okay.
And I don't know how to adjust it. Because I didn't even see, like, I saw what I was saying to you and your face and stuff after I went out. So I don't really know. It's fine.
Okay. Okay, awesome. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for joining this series. If you don't mind, it's okay if we get right into it?
Oh, great. Gracie said she sees both of us. Great.
Okay, good. Good, good, good. Okay. So, I would love for you to introduce yourself, your name, and what do you do?
Okay, so I'm Destiny Huff. I am a neuroaffirming IEP coach and a non-attorney special education advocate. I help train organizations, schools, parents, early childhood educators, and educators on neuroaffirming practices, autism, ADHD, and IEPs. And I'm also late diagnosed autistic and ADHD and the mother of two neurodivergent children.
Awesome. I love that. You do so many things that I didn't know you did, but I love that. Okay. So, second question. Do you work with a specific grade range of families? I did hear you say adults, but do you work with a specific grade range of families, elementary, high school?
No, I actually work with the whole gambit, and I'm also a mental health therapist as well. So I will have families that will come to me for that. But a lot of my families that I support have learners that are neurodivergent, predominantly autistic, ADHD, or speech delay or anxiety. But I do have a few families that I support where the learner has a visual impairment or a hearing impairment as well.
Oh, great, great. I see in the comments ADV for Kids Inc. says Destiny's amazing.
Thank you, Cheryl. I feel like that's Cheryl advocating for Kids Inc. Cheryl Poe. So I'm presenting at her conference coming next month, the Black Collective Advocacy Network Conference, and so that's on my page too.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you for sharing. Okay, so can you define neurodivergent for the parents who are watching?
Yeah, so neurodivergent just means natural diversity of the human mind. So it means that our brains differ, neurodivergent individuals' brains differ from the norm, and they diverge from the typical society way of thinking.
Okay, great, great. Okay. Is there a difference between neurodiverse and neurodivergent? If so, what is the difference?
Yeah, there is. So neurodivergent, when you're talking about that, you're typically talking about one individual and the way that their brain thinks. When we start talking about neurodiverse, we're talking about a group of people with different types of brains. So a lot of people think autism, ADHD, but it's also dyslexia and OCD and OCPD and Tourette's. And so when we say the term neurodiverse, we're talking about a group of individuals. So that's the difference.
Okay, great. Okay, and in your experience, what is the most respectable way to identify children with disabilities?
I think it all depends on the child and how they identify. Same with the adult and how they identify. So we're very focused on that people first aspect, right? And so, like, I say I'm autistic. I say that my child is autistic. I have an autistic child instead of saying a child with autism or living with autism. But I also press the importance of letting the individual decide. So, for example, we no longer use the term Asperger's because of where it comes from and its history of the term. But you have a lot of older autistic individuals who still use that term to self identify. And so I always say, go with what they say, but just to be safe as far as that identity piece, you can start with saying autistic and this person's autistic. I have an autistic child. And then if they say, well, I'm a child with autism, then you identify with it that way.
Okay, great. Yeah, I had a mom on Monday and I asked her the same question and she was saying what you said, human first. And so she just introduces her son as her son's name and then she allowed people around to ask if they were curious on his differences and then she would say, okay, he has this type of thing. Yeah. Okay. So I have seen that you also train parents. I've heard you too in this live say you've trained parents. What are some common concerns and questions that you've heard amongst parents?
A lot of times when parents come to me, so some parents come to me just because they're wanting an extra set of eyes. So, like, I do IEP reviews, I review evaluation results. So they're just coming to me from a standpoint of, I'm just not sure on all the information, or I have questions. And it's easier sometimes to talk to a parent, especially a parent of special education children. So they come to me for that. Another concern is the collaboration piece. So feeling unheard, but not exactly understanding or knowing what to ask. So if I ask this, do I sound like I don't know what I'm talking about? Does it make sense to ask this question? Um, and then another one that I really want to pinpoint is there's a lot of misinformation out there. And so everyone comes from, and I always like to say it doesn't come from malice. People come from their own experience. So you have some people that are like, you need to bring an advocate with you to every IEP meeting that you have. You need to always have an attorney present. Everyone's got their own opinion that comes from their own experience. And so I always tell parents, your experience can be unique to you or not, but look at the resources, look at the references, look at the people that are telling you the information to make sure it's valid. And so that's another concern I see, is where I've noticed that sometimes school personnel will only know what they're taught, right? So this is what I was taught, so this is how it goes, but that doesn't mean it's law. Same with the neuroaffirming and neurodivergent practices. You have a lot of people now, that's kind of the hot button term, is like Gestalt language processing and neurodivergent and neuroaffirming. And a lot of individuals that are posting and creating content on that, they don't really know what it means, but they know that it's going to get them an audience. And so I always just tell parents to make sure you're doing your own research.
That's awesome. Yeah. In my experience as well, is like it's the collaboration between parents and teachers that concern. The whole, they are not sure of what to say, what they can speak up for, what things they can change in a meeting. I've heard the term, it's a battle at the IEP table between other IEP team members and themselves. And so they feel shut down and shut out, not heard, and things like that. And I would just say, practically, bring questions beforehand, because that will also lessen the nervousness, especially if you've been shut down for so long.
Mm-hmm.
You, when you go to the next IEP meeting, you just shut down, don't know what to say, or you do know what to say, but you don't want to say anything. So I would say bring questions beforehand, because if you have a script in front of you, questions in front of you, that will lessen the nervousness and prepare you ahead of time. So that would just say that one thing, just practically.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Next question. What are the top 3 things that you teach parents on how to support their neurodivergent learners?
The first one is, not to presume competence and to not let someone else cap the capacity of your child. The number one thing that I see is kind of this assumption of what neurodivergent individuals are capable of. And I always like to buck that system. I'm an example of that. And I don't share this story often, but when I was in high school, my freshman year, I was really struggling. I have hypothyroidism, and so we didn't know it yet, so I wasn't taking medication, but it was really affecting my memory, and I was having memory fog and things like that. And at one point, I had a school counselor that just told me, like, you need to figure out what you want to do life after high school, because, like, you may not graduate, and you're definitely not going to college. So, right. Like, I'm a freshman in college. And so to this day, my mom is always like, I wish you could find her. And like, I don't know if she's still with us or anything, She was like, and just show her all your degrees and all your success, because that is something that, a lot of times neurodivergent individuals just get, handicapped with this notion of what they can and can't do. So the first one is for parents, again, to just presume competence and to, fight for what you think your child could know or could be capable of. The second one is learning about neuroaffirming practices. That's something that I teach them how to support their neurodivergent learners. So we know that like stimming and fidgeting are key, and we know that making eye contact doesn't have to be key for the learner to demonstrate that they're learning. And so That's the second one, is the neuroaffirming practices, making sure that they learn that. And then the third one that I teach them is how to really review the documents and document their concerns and use their voice. So a lot of times when parents come to me, they have valid questions, they have valid concerns. And sometimes it is just a miscommunication with them not asking the question or communicating it. And so the school doesn't know that's a question. So there's not a response. And so that's another piece that I always say. I have a lot of parents that come to me and they're not documenting things, or, we get a lot of phone calls, and we have a lot of like, oh, you're picking up in the car line, so let's have this conversation. And that's fine because it's happening.
Right.
But I tell my parents, you need to document that. You need to follow up with an email, because in the moment, and I've seen this a lot too, where, the educator might say like, hey, yeah, we can totally do that. But then, they have to answer to someone, right? So they go back to their administrator, and the administrator's like, yeah, no, we can't do that. And so now the parent's like, I thought we were on the same page. And it's not the educator intentionally doing it, but it's just, like they did have to go talk to someone else. So that's when I tell the parent, well, you document and you guys have a meeting and discuss so everyone can be on the same page. So neuroaffirming practices, documentation, and presuming competence for their learner are the top three.
Great. Oh, I totally agree with all of it, for one. But I've experienced the whole lack of documentation part of just being a spec teacher and experiencing different team members and everything. I think that documenting the communication of the going back and forth and everything like that definitely helps. Definitely helps. And just simple documentation doesn't have to be a whole, extensive sheet. Just
Right.
Here's the date, here's the person I talked to, here's like a synopsis of what we talked about, things like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, how can parents who are neurodivergent themselves advocate for their child and communicate effectively with teachers? Because I have heard this before. Parents who are neurodivergent themselves, they have a tough time communicating themselves, and they don't know what to say. They would want scripts, things like that for themselves. So how can they advocate for their child and communicate effectively with teachers?
A big thing that I push for my neurodivergent parents is to, one, when we're talking about communication specifically in the IEP meetings or the R meeting or the ARC meeting, wherever you are, whatever you may call it, bring a support with you. Bring someone that can kind of carry that emotional load, but also take notes. I talked to a parent the other day who was just kind of like, hey, I want to record the meeting. And so they started taking notes for the meeting, right? And so it's like those type of things really help you and make you feel like you're not alone in hearing what's being said and documenting what's being said. Another one would be recording meetings. If you just want to make sure you can play it back for your significant other that's not in the meeting, or you want to play it back for yourself to communicating, you always want to make sure to check with state laws and see how that works. Some states, you can record whatever. You don't have to give prior notice. Some states, the school is supposed to record and provide a copy, and you can also record. So just make sure you check with your state on that. Another thing is, getting an advocate. I mean, and it's not just about, like paid advocates. There are free advocates out there. You have the parent centers that have advocates. You have organizations like Easter Seals. You just have different disability groups depending on your learner's disability. They have free advocates, but having an advocate to be able to meet with you prior to the meeting to communicate what you're trying to communicate and then help you communicate after, or an advocate behind the scenes. I'm an advocate behind the scenes for some of my clients where they attend the meetings. I draft the letters, I draft the emails, and because we're able to talk through what they're thinking and what they're wanting to work on and have that down on paper. Another thing that I am going to be doing, because I was asked this by one of my followers, was to provide some scripts for neurodivergent parents. And so I'm working on that right now. Of just kind of things that they could say and questions to ask and things to bring with them to really support them through that process. But those are some ways to advocate for yourself. The biggest thing I could say is don't go it alone. I don't recommend that neurodivergent parents go to any IEP meeting alone, whether you bring a friend, a family member, an advocate, whoever you bring with you.
Yeah, I love that, to bring somebody with you all times. And I agree with that. Even just as a special ed teacher, I totally agree with that. Especially, it can be intimidating sitting
Mhm.
around at a table with so many people. It could definitely be intimidating. So having somebody with you um, definitely is beneficial and helpful, and helps you speak up more too and advocate, and lean on somebody that probably knows more than you do. I know you know more than parents, those who you go with. So yeah, just having somebody with them all the time in IEP meetings will definitely move the needle for those IEPs.
Mhm.
What are some common IEP goals that you have seen while advocating at the IEP table that aren't useful, in your opinion?
Um, so when I see goals that aren't SMART, so they're not specific, measurable, achievable, or attainable, whichever term you want to use, realistic or time oriented, that's the first one. I always tell parents, like, just in general, if you can't look at this goal and tell what your learner is working on, who is going to support them and what is going to support them, how long they have to accomplish the goal, and if you don't feel like the goal is actually obtainable based on data in your learner, then you definitely need to have that goal rewritten. So that's the first one. The second one is non-neural affirming goals. So I've seen goals where they are forcing sensory on learners. So, let's say they have a sensory aversion to something and they're forcing them to do it. Now, I had a very interesting conversation about that with another educator who was discussing how he will have some of his older autistic learners, so like, juniors and seniors who want to work in, let's say, the food industry. And so working on addressing sensory aversions they have because of needing that skill for the job. And so I want to specify that that is completely different, right? Because you're talking about 16 to 22-year-olds who are asking, I want to work past this, right? Because I want a job to do this and I know this is something I have to do, versus us saying, this 4-year-old has the sensory aversion and we're going to force them into it. So I just want to be very clear when I talk about that, and sensory needs. It's very different. Some other goals that I've seen is like making eye contact. When we start talking about starting, initiating, and maintaining conversations, and I say that because a lot of times the goal, the way you phrase it, is what determines if it's neural affirming, and depending on what you're talking about. So eye contact goals are never going to be neural affirming, period, in my opinion. But when you start talking about starting, initiating, maintaining conversations, I like goals that focus on conversation and communication, where you're allowing the neurodivergent learner to talk about what they want to talk about. You're teaching them how they can end a conversation when they don't want to have the conversation. You're teaching them how they can start a conversation when they want to start a conversation. A lot of the goals that I see in that regard, when we start talking about conversation and communication, are forcing the learner to talk about things they don't want to talk about, forcing them to have conversations with people they don't want to have conversations with. And so that's why I say it's important to look at, what is the purpose of this goal? Are we trying to make this neurodivergent individual be neurotypical, which is someone who's not neurodivergent, or are we trying to help them socially and help them build friendships and relationships? Because we spend a lot of time creating goals that teach neurodivergents how to be neurotypical and don't spend enough time teaching neurotypicals how to appropriately communicate with neurodivergents.
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of those goals that aren't neuro affirming, definitely they try to force the stereotype
Mhm.
of the culture and things as such. Like with me as a neurotypical adult, I don't always want to answer questions or talk to certain people in certain ways, or I don't even need to make eye contact, things like that. And so that's why we need to adapt to the child. So I totally agree with everything that you've just said. Making it neuro affirming is definitely a key term. Okay, what are some neurodivergent affirming IEP goals that parents can suggest for the IEP?
So one of the biggest things when we're talking about neuroaffirming, and I learned to incorporate this from Lisa Baskin-Wright, who's one of my favorite people, is making
We're
sure that
having
when we're
a live with her on the 31st
yeah,
for this
saw that.
special.
I saw that. Yeah, I love Lisa. I love her. She's become one of my favorite people, and we've never met in person. But we definitely lean on each other and things like that. So, but one of the things I learned from her, especially when we're talking about goals for neurodivergent learners, is incorporating executive functioning supports and sensory supports. So a lot of times we look at, and I posted a reel today about how instead of calling it, sensory toys or fidget toys, calling them tools, because when we imply toys, we imply that they're being used just for fun, which they can be. And we take away from the fact that neurodivergent learners have executive functioning barriers and they have sensory needs. And sometimes these tools can help them, and we have to kind of figure out which tool works for them. So when we start talking about neuroaffirming goals, you want to look at incorporating executive functioning tools and sensory supports. You also want to look at self-advocacy. Every time I have a neurodivergent learner and I'm reviewing their IEP, if I don't see it in there, I ask the parent, hey, have they ever worked on self-advocacy? Because we want them, they're not required, and I always say that they're not legally required to request their accommodations and modifications and supports, but the school is legally required to provide them. So that being said, though, I want them to feel comfortable saying, I need a break. I need more time. I need extra time. I need a sensory tool to complete this. I've hit my capacity for today. And everyone thinks you have to do this in middle and high school. I'm like, no, they can be adding this. I
Right.
had self-advocacy goals in my son's IEP when he was in kindergarten, because I want him to feel like he can speak up about what he needs. So executive functioning supports and tools, sensory supports and tools, self-advocacy goals. And then we always get to when we talk about neuroaffirming, asking the learner what it is that they need, what it is that they want to do. If they want to work on making friends, then let's put a goal in there about social, not necessarily social skills, because the social skills training is not neuroaffirming. We want to look at those social skills from that neuroaffirming standpoint of them being able to initiate a conversation about their special interests, them being able to tell the friend and understand, so let me backtrack. One of the things I did with my son was he had a goal where we worked through situations and we talked about how it's fine if you don't want to talk about if you want to play Pokemon and they don't want to do Pokemon, because that's a special interest. But if they don't want to do Pokemon, they may not play with you at that time. And him understanding that's okay. And if I want to play something else, then maybe they'll play with me, but I make that decision. I'm not being forced to go play something else that I don't want to play at that time. So that's what I mean by when we talk about those neuroaffirming goals.
Okay, great. I heard you say executive functioning supports. I know what that is, but for the parents, can you define what executive functioning supports are?
So executive functioning supports are just any tools that can help them with their executive functioning. So when we talk about executive functioning, we're talking about organizing, we're talking about planning, we're talking about their regulation. So, being able to either self-regulate or co-regulate. So somebody else helping them check their emotions. We're talking about impulsivity. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about executive functioning. So some supports that might help is, for example, your ADHD learner that fidgets. So they might need a fidget tool to help them focus while they're doing a writing task or doing a math task. They might need another executive functioning support, could be alternative seating or alternate seating. So instead of them sitting in your typical desk setup, maybe they stand up at one of the stand-up desks, or maybe they're allowed to walk over to another part of the room to finish their task, or they have the wobbly chairs. So that's what executive functioning supports are.
Great. And I love the examples that you gave. Like they can use a wobbly chair, they can stand up if they want, because just going back to the whole adapting to the child and not fitting them into a mold of the social construct of non-neuroaffirming aspects. So that's amazing. Yeah. And Gracie R6912 said, I'm a parent that I have to go with someone else. I think she's talking about bringing somebody with her to the IEP meeting. I felt my voice was being heard. I will continue to bring someone with me during the IEP meetings. That's great, super beneficial to have somebody with you. It diminishes the intimidation. That person asks the right, effective questions for you. They can speak up for you. Yeah, so that's awesome, Gracie. Okay, next question. What is due process on a slightly different note? What is due process, and when should parents seek due process?
So due process is a legal term. Due process gets into when the parent and the school are in disagreement about the IEP. So this can be disagreement about placement. So let's say the parent wants their child to be in the general education classroom and the school is saying, no, we think that your learner needs to be in a self-contained classroom. This can be about services. So let's say there's just a disagreement about related services. So related services are speech, occupational therapy, physical therapy, counseling, social work. And this could be a disagreement about removal of the IEP. So let's say that the parents have decided, we think that our learners still need special education and specifically design instruction. And the school says, no, we think the learner has progressed enough to come off of the IEP. So then that would be when the parent would in writing invoke due process. And so, or stay put, really. So stay put. And it's different for each state how the process goes. And so you'd want to look at your state and see. But invoking stay put means that the school and the parent are in disagreement. And so the current IEP is being invoked to stay in place until the school and parent can agree. A lot of times this is when due process is then invoked. And then a lot of times states will initiate mediation. And I'm saying all this and saying, again, I'm a non-attorney special education advocate. But so that's a lot of times when due process is initiated, and IDEA, which is the Individuals Disabilities Education Act, added mediation into the IDEA law specifically to see if the parent and the school can resolve the issue that they're having without getting attorneys involved in going to court. A lot of times when you invoke due process, the district will then start providing their attorney, especially if mediation can't be alleviated. And so I definitely recommend that if parents decide to do due process, they get their own attorney, because there will be, the attorney for the district will be writing any of their briefs and communication. And you have so much time to respond. And then you have a certain way you have to respond because it is legal proceedings. When should parents seek due process? So that really depends on the parent. I always say you want to start with, and I'm going to combine it with the next question, are there steps parents should try first before seeking due process? And if so, what are they? So I always recommend that you exhaust all options before going to due process. This is my personal opinion, and this is due to having friends who have gone through due process, which it can be a strenuous process. When I'm saying what steps you should try, so communicating with the school, making sure everything is documented. If you have an issue with a specific teacher, so I've supported parents who had an issue with one teacher on the team, because as our learners get older, they're going to have different math, science, social studies, right? So maybe they have an issue with the social studies teacher, and that is the individual that they're struggling with, but the rest of the IEP team is in agreement on how to support the learner. So always communicate with the individual you're having issues with. Go up the chain of command. So start with that person you're having issues with, then, involve the case manager, because they're supposed to be the ones that are making sure that the IEP is being taken care of and followed legally, and that all the supports are in place. Then go to the assistant principal and principal. Then, depending on the state you're in, go to the diagnostician, or go to your school liaison, or go to your procedural support liaison, and get into your, getting up into your special education director, and then to superintendent. So I'm very big on making sure you've exhausted all things. So communicating with the individual, going up the chain of command, documenting your issues and concerns, making sure they're documenting their issues and concerns and responses. So for example, if you make a request, they accept or refuse, they have to do a prior written notice and document that. And that's legal. So doing those things first, then I recommend getting an advocate or consulting with an advocate. I've had people who've consulted with me before and I was like, you need an attorney. You need a special education attorney. So consulting with an advocate and seeing if they can help alleviate that. And then, depending on the situation, you might just have to head into due process. And in some states, advocates can support you in the due process, and it doesn't have to be, or non-attorney advocates can. So like in the state of Virginia, non-attorney advocates can support you in the due process. You do not have to have an attorney. So.
Okay, great. And I have a follow-up question. When or what are the situations and when they should seek an attorney versus an advocate?
So it's really going to depend on the situation. I definitely say if you suspect any type of like abuse of your child, of your learner, 100% get an attorney. If you're seeing blatant violations of IDEA, specifically looking at where compensatory services are warranted. So compensatory services are when your child's special education services are not being provided by the school. And so the district is required to compensate those services until they have provided all of them. So let's say the speech therapist was out and nobody was giving your learner speech therapy. Then the district would calculate how much you're owed, and then you should be provided that. So situations like that, you could go ahead and consult with an attorney. Always do the consultation option, because sometimes you'll go to an attorney and you'll consult and they'll tell you to get an advocate. And I've had clients come to me where they're like, I went to an attorney first. The attorney said I should get an advocate. So here I am. So the situation is it's going to be dependent. It's going to depend on your state as well. Because like I said, in Virginia, non-attorney advocates can support you in due process. So for example, Cheryl Poe, who's with Advocating for Kids, Inc., she handles a lot of due process cases in the state of Virginia. And she's excellent at them. So you don't always need an attorney to handle due process. It's really it's going to really be situation dependent.
Okay, great. And then Gracie R, she wrote a comment saying, asking, can the learning be half time in SPED and half in a general ed setting?
Yeah, so I had a conversation with one of my clients the other day for our first meeting. And so special education is a service, not a place. And so when we talk about the settings, the learner can be in general. So these are just some examples. And again, different states call them different things. But the learner can be in general education setting and have a one-on-one para, for example, or a one-on-one aid, or whatever your state may call it, because California calls it something different. I can't remember what they call it right now. But that could be their placement. So they have general education services and they have a one-on-one. They're in a general education setting and they have a one-on-one in the classroom with them. That's their least restrictive environment. And then they get all their special education services in that general education classroom, or they get pulled out for some of their special education services. Then you can have a learner that is completely in, let's say, a self-contained classroom, but they go to music, art, PE for their general education for time with their non-disabled peers, because you're supposed to make sure that the learner gets time with their non-disabled peers so they can have those interactions. Then you can have learners that are in the self-contained classroom and they go into the general education classroom for math or science or reading for 30 minutes 3 times a week to get that interaction with their non-disabled peers. So there can be a variety. I always recommend for parents, and then we have our also, like our inclusion classrooms, and we have our co-taught classrooms. So when we talk about co-taught classrooms, classrooms, we have a general education teacher and a special education teacher in the same classroom. So I always tell parents it does not hurt to ask for data to be collected if you want to see what it would be like for your learner to go into the general education if they're in a self-contained. I always recommend if they are talking about getting rid of special education services altogether and your learner has only ever been in a co-taught classroom or only ever been in a self-contained classroom, that you ask them to do trial basis of your learner in the general education setting to just see how it would be. But yeah, you can totally have part of your time in one and part of your time in the other. They don't have to be in one whole place.
Yeah, and when you brought up how sometimes they can go into the different classroom to experience a different subject, things like that. I know in California we call that mainstreaming. And yeah, that mainstreaming helps students get acclimated to being with peers. Um, for students, it helps them transition better from one setting to a different setting, things like that. It gets them acclimated to what they're learning as well, just generally. So yeah, I think mainstreaming is, in my opinion, a benefit for students, but it's not for all students. Not every student gets that, gets mainstreaming. But those who do have it, it is a benefit for them. Yeah. Okay. And then next question. What is an IEE, and when are they necessary?
So, an IEE is an independent education evaluation, and those are necessary when you, as the parent, are in disagreement with the district's special education evaluation. It can be the entire evaluation or it can be a portion of it. So, what I mean by that is, let's say that you agree with the school psychologist's evaluation of your child on the Vineland and the Basque. So, we're looking at behavior and looking at adaptive living skills, but you're in disagreement with the occupational therapist evaluation and you believe that your child should qualify for occupational services or they need fine motor support. So you can request an IEE and always do it in writing for any portion of the assessment that you're in disagreement with. So again, whether it's the related service providers documentation or if it's the evaluation as a whole. So I definitely say they are necessary if I will see a lot of evaluation results and I'll see where the parent is noting that the learner is able to do certain things at home and that learner is a multimodal communicator. So let's say they use an AAC device. And so the reason why the evaluator was not able to accurately assess them is because they were expecting for them to verbally communicate. So then you definitely would want to request an IEE so that you can get an accurate assessment using different alternate formats for communication. Another time it would be necessary, again, would be going back to the related services. So when we're talking about speech, occupational therapy, physical therapy, assistive technology, I've requested an IE for that before, where it was determined that an assistive technology was not needed for the learner, but it was obviously needed. And so we requested an IEE for an outside evaluation to be done on assistive technology. So those are times when it's necessary. When you're in disagreement with the results and after communicating with the team and asking your questions and getting clarification, you still feel like, I still don't agree with these results and I feel like an outside evaluator should be conducting this evaluation.
Okay. Great, yeah. And I want to add too that IEEs can be paid for by the school if they offer it, or will be paid at the parent's cost for an IEE. But don't let that stop you, parent, if you find that being necessary. And I want to add too that if parents don't agree with what the school system, the results of the special education assessment, there is an option for a 504 plan as well. That's not special education, but it can support your learner. And you can research a 504 plan or DM me. But yeah, but a 504 plan can be another option for your child. Okay, how can parents help build trust with their child's district?
I mean, I always tell parents it's always about communication and collaboration. The biggest thing is when I get hired, sometimes my families will be like, "Well, I just kind of want you to show up at the meeting, and I don't want to tell them that you're coming." And I'm like, "No, we're not doing that." Or they'll say, "I don't want to send them any of the stuff because I want, to do them like they've been doing me, right?" And I'm like, "No, we're not going to do that either." But I would say communication, collaboration, being upfront. That's really how you build trust. And when I go into a meeting, I always say this. I've only had one meeting so far where I literally got yelled at, and I was just kind of like, that's not necessary. I was calm the whole time. I think that made it worse for them, for the person yelling at me. But um, I was coming to the meeting like this is a collaborative process, and I'm here to support this learner, and I know that you are too. So let's all get on the same page and talk this through. And so I always tell parents, approach it that way. Every year, start off like this is a new year. We're having a new approach. And that's difficult, and I'm a parent of two children in special education. I don't say that lightly. Every time that you step into that room, sometimes you feel like it's them against you. And I think you have to just set up from the beginning. I would say walk in there like this is who I am, like, and I'm just here to support my child, and I'm just here to get them what they need. And if you're in the same place as me, then this is going to be great. But if we're not on the same page with that, then this might be a little bumpy.
Right. Yeah, we're all here for the child.
Yeah,
You are open to saying, what you feel is right for the child. Me as well. We're an equal of the person of the IEP team. So all that jazz, right? And I would to add, how can parents build trust is by adding input into the IEP too, because that will also make you feel and know that you are part of the IEP team, adding that input in there during and before each IEP meeting, being consistent, collaborative in that way, you can build trust. Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay. What are your top 3 ways parents can advocate for their child with their families and friends, and top 3 ways at the IEP table?
So with family and friends, I would almost say that's even more difficult than the IEP table, right? Because at the IEP table, you're going once, twice, maybe a year,
Right.
depending on what's going on. So but I'll start with the family and friends. One is just setting boundaries. A lot of times the stress comes from feeling like you're constantly have to explain why you're parenting your child the way you are, or why your child is quote unquote the way they are, when it's really just others needing to be able to learn and adapt. And so set boundaries, don't allow people in your space that you're constantly having to, and I say that as friends or family, that you're constantly having to explain your child to and justify why you allow your child to operate the way that they are and why you parent the way you are. The second one is find your people. Like find people that are, having the same battles as you and the same accomplishments as you. And I saw someone that was talking about how she told a family member about her minimally speaking child saying like a sentence, and they were like, okay. And then she told like her community that she's a part of, and everyone was like, oh my gosh, that's so amazing, that's exciting. And so I was like, yeah, it's important to find your people, the people that really understand what you're going through and your wins, and they're really there to support you. And the third way to advocate is to just continue to learn. I think the best way that we teach others is that we learn ourselves. And so, like, 4 years ago, I didn't know what neuroaffirming was. And 4 years ago, I didn't know about the infinity symbol. And so, it's always about being willing to learn and be willing to listen to the disabled voices for the disability of your child, and learning about what the adults are saying to really be able to support your child now, so that when they become an adult, they feel they have that support.
Mm. Love that. Yeah. And Gracie R6912 said finding parent support groups helps a lot. Yeah. And practically you can go Facebook support groups like that. Yeah. Or search your local community parent groups like that. If you bring your child to the park a lot, you know, like that, your school PTA. Um, there's different ways and different areas you can find parent support groups.
Yeah,
But yes.
a lot of virtual and in-person options for sure. Um, and then for the top three ways at the IEP table to advocate for your child is one, know your learner's disability. One of the biggest things is that I will see parents that they're not entirely sure about the things that would benefit their learner as they go through the school system with their disability. They're not entirely sure about the supports that they can have. So learn about their disability, learn about their category of eligibility. So the category of eligibility is different from the disability, and schools don't diagnose, they categorize. In order for your child to be on an IEP, they have to qualify and become eligible under one of the 13 categories of IDEA. And so learn about that, because some schools and districts and states will try and limit your child's services and supports because of the category, which is also not something that should be being done. So learn about their disability, learn about their category. That's the first one. The second one is learn special education law. I know that sounds taxing, and trust me, it is taxing. I support clients in over 20 states, and so I have over 20 handbooks downloaded. So from California to Washington to New York to Connecticut to Florida. But learn special education law, learn about the Individuals Disability Education Act, learn about FAPE, free and appropriate public education, learn about the Rehabilitation Act, under 504. Like, learn about these things so that you can really support your child. And the third way to advocate at the IEP table is to give yourself time to understand what's being said. And what I mean by that is you don't have to sign stuff right at the meeting. You don't have to approve the notes right then and there. You don't have to approve the IEP. Take your time, request the documentation, take it with you. Oh, Gracie said, where can you get that information? I'm in the state of California. So for your state Department of Education laws and guidelines and statutes, go to your state department's website. So California Department of Education, Georgia Department of Education, Florida Department of Education, and look up Special Education Handbook. Some states will call it the Special Education Parent Guide. Some will call it the Parents Guide to Special Education, but you can always go to your state department's website to learn your state statutes, and then you can go to the Department of Education, the federal website, to look at the IDEA statutes.
So good. Thank you for answering that question. Yeah, that's a great question, Gracie. Definitely great. And as we close, one, I loved our conversation that we had, and the goal is to be helping parents. And I believe we definitely helped parents on this live. How can actually first, would you like to add anything to this conversation?
The only thing I want to add is just like, parents, there's so many free resources out there. And I have a lot of parents that, are just like, I can't afford in this climate. I completely understand that. And so I just tell them, like, make sure you're accessing those free resources. Like, you have our accounts that you can follow on Instagram. You have Facebook accounts that you can follow. There's Facebook groups. Personalized, I think it's Personalized Learning Solutions. It's run by Shamika Allen, who's part of COPA, so the Council of Parent Advocates and Attorneys. And she runs a Facebook group. It's a IEP 504 parent support group, I want to say, on Facebook. It's an amazing group. There's so many different individuals that are a part of it. So like I said, there's so many free resources out there. Also, always make sure that you are following individuals on social media for your learner's specific disability. I think that's something that parents miss out a lot on, is your learner, like if you have a medically complex learner, right, you're going to want to follow somebody that is able to specifically talk about medically complex supports for IEPs for your learner. Or if you have a learner that has cerebral palsy, you're going to want to follow someone that has specific supports for cerebral palsy. So really looking at those type of accounts to follow, along with those that look at neuroaffirming practices and those that look at special education law.
Great, great. And Gracie asked, sorry, what is FAPE? Am I spelling it right? So FAPE is free and appropriate public education, and parents aren't responsible fully for that. We are responsible, those who are in the district. We're responsible for providing FAPE for your child. And what FAPE is it requires students with disability to receive the services that they need for their education, to access their education. But yeah, that's just a simple definition of FAPE, free and appropriate public education. Hopefully that answered your question, Gracie. Is there anything you'd like to add on that, Destiny?
Yeah, it's just that free part, so at no cost. So a lot of times I'll have parents that'll say, my learner needs this, and I don't know, I'm going to pay out of pocket for that. And it's like, that's the responsibility of the district. Same way that there's a disagreement in placement, and the district is like, we can't support your learner here. They would benefit from a therapeutic day school. Then they're supposed to be fronting the cost of that therapeutic day school. And so, that's a key piece of that free and appropriate public education. And I have a document on my website that talks about two different denials of FAPE. So when we say denials of FAPE, these are things that the district has not done, and that's a denial of FAPE, and that is illegal.
Yeah, thanks for adding that. Definitely true. Definitely. Okay, so how can parents find you, Destiny?
So you can find me at destinyhuffconsulting.com. That's my website. You can find me here on Instagram at destinyhuff_IEP_advocate. And then you can find me on Facebook under Destiny Huff Consulting.
Perfect, perfect. And if anybody is new on this that aren't following me, you can go to my Instagram and sign up for the email list. When you do that, you'll automatically get an IEP roadmap, steps to special education freebie for that. But I love this conversation. This has been great. This is definitely staying on my page. Any of you who are watching now or later, you can reach out to me or Destiny with any questions that you have. But is there anything that you'd like to add, Destiny?
No, thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you for joining me, and for joining me on this live. Okay. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, you too.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.